Now we go from marriage to firefighting. And hopefully there's no connection. I'd like to invite Mr. Campbell forward. Okay, I'm sorry. The segue was terrible. But here, there's some information being presented by Ms. Parr and Mr. Campbell regarding residential sprinklers in Carroll.
Good morning, Commissioners.
Good morning.
As you know, you had asked some time ago to have a briefing or two items on the agenda, this one being the first one on the sprinkler ordinance, and also our emergency operations plan that will come after Mr. Campbell. The sprinkler ordinance briefing, first let me talk about the sprinkler ordinance. The information was offered back in 2004 by the CCBs in regards to looking at adopting a sprinkler ordinance. Hence then was adopted in 2005 by the 57th Board of County Commissioners. And the ordinance basically addresses new residential construction for 1 and 2 family. And as you may or may not know, the state and county has separate codes that address residential separate from industrial commercial development. So this does not include industrial commercial development, but residential. And Mr. Campbell's going to walk you through, I believe you all had in advance this packet that you were able to look at and read, and you might have it before you now. Hopefully you do. But if you don't, does anyone need a copy? There's a couple of copies down here if you... Okay.
They're here.
All right. We're ready. Scott.
Good morning, Commissioners.
Good morning.
Good morning.
It's a pleasure to be here and to talk to you about residential sprinklers and actually some overview of what's occurred in Carroll County and also an overview of some studies done in other jurisdictions throughout the United States. Ms. Parr has done an excellent job of sharing some background of how we've got to this point. I just want to add that the residential sprinkler recommendation from the CCVISA, the Carroll County Voluntary Emergency Services Association, really was an evolution of a previous fire protection initiative that required quantities of water to be provided so that there was the ability to suppress a fire or fight a fire once it occurred. This was proffered by the fire service as a substantial improvement in life safety in that instead of trying to fight the fire once it occurs, what could we do to maybe keep the fire from occurring or at least allowing it to become a significant fire, if you will. So it's a significant change and a kind of a proactive, if you will, approach to life safety. The justification that was proffered by CCVs was significant and rather widespread, everything from what I just shared, a transition in their focus from how to deal with a fire once it occurs and becomes a substantial incident. Just had one early this morning, vacant farmhouse in the Pleasant Valley area that committed a lot of resources, personnel, etc., to going with how to prevent or eliminate the occurrence of a significant fire from the onset. Protection of loss of life is well documented. That life protection is not just the occupants of the dwelling, it's also documented that it protects the lives of the firefighters. It reduces property damage, reduces the demand for service. You eliminate working fires, you eliminate the demand for all the resources required to address that working fire. And I apologize for the term working fire, but please consider a fire that extends beyond its initial point of ignition, if you will, say several rooms, floor, and in many cases actually the entire structure of origin. There's a reduced cost. If it takes less to deal with the incident, less cost is associated with that effort. If you can reduce the demand on the fire service, then you can extend the ability for it to remain a primarily volunteer-based service. It allows non-committed resources to remain available for other incidents. That's both apparatus and the most critical resource, personnel. And again, I talked about the reduction in cost, and that's also in a capital aspect. If you can reduce the wear and tear on your capital resources, you can extend the life of those. Some general operating aspects of automatic residential sprinklers. First, sprinklers, commonly referred to as sprinkler heads, are activated by heat. So if someone burns their toast, they're not going to set their sprinklers off. Individual heads have to reach a specific temperature before they open, operate, and discharge water. They are heat activated, and it is a very precise temperature at which they're designed to open. Only those sprinkler heads that are exposed to and reach this requisite temperature open and discharge water. When one head opens or operates, it does not, in fact, initiate discharge from all sprinkler heads. I think it's another misconception that we have to address. Under an evaluation of some documented experience, first we're going to talk about the number of sprinkler heads that operate. Again, I talked about that when sprinkler heads have to be activated by heat, and the fact that when one is activated, only those that reach the temperature are the ones who discharge water. That to support that, a 15-year study of Prince George's County, Maryland's residential sprinkler requirement found that in 96% of all fires that occurred in residential dwellings, and that's a significant number when you look at 235 out of 245, that in 96% of those times, only one or two head was required to either control or extinguish the fire. Similarly, as this report shows, that a similar study from Scottsdale, Arizona showed a 92% figure for that same scenario, one or two heads. Now, the Arizona study went on to say that for those situations where more than two heads did operate, and this is a quote, the majority of exceptions to the one and two head activation were the result of incidents involving flammable liquids, and the report did not elaborate whether that meant something like a cooking oil or whether, in fact, it was some kind of a malicious incident. To give you an idea of some installation costs, and I'm sure you've all heard different constituents that come to you and share, the cost of their sprinkler installation. So we went to 4 different vendors that are licensed in the state and operate in Carroll County, and candidly are frequent customers or clients of ours, if you will, that we do reviews for and work with. And to respect their anonymity, they're listed in the report as basically vendors A, B, C, and D. But they were very forthcoming to share what their costs were, and understandably they weren't interested in having their name associated with their pricing information. But in a nutshell, the average of the averages, if you allow me, $1.14 per square foot if the property is on public water, and they had a consistent average additional cost of $1,500 if a pump and tank were required, i.e. if it's not on public water. And I will share with you that clearly is in contrast to some of the costs experience that we've heard from our constituents. So somewhere that cost is being significantly inflated or escalated. A national survey conducted by the National Fire Protection Research found...
Is this pricing or is this their cost?
This is what they quote to someone who comes to them, to their
Okay, so
customer.
this is their pricing?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes. So we talked to fire protection vendor A, and we asked them, what would you charge a person who needed a sprinkler system? This is the information they would use to develop their cost.
So are you suggesting that in a 2,000 square foot house that's only going to cost $1,400 to put in a sprinkler system?
According to vendor A, they're saying on a public water, I assume that's where you're at, Commissioner, that there's a 70 cent per square foot. Vendor B says between $1 and $1.25 per square foot, and they're saying that's the cost for the further installation.
Now, is that for just the heads, or is that the heads and the plumbing infrastructure?
I'm going to say it's the complete sprinkler system, Commissioner. What I cannot say to you is whether that addresses any other ancillary cost being on public water, if they have to upsize the water supply from the public water from maybe a 3/4 up to a 1 inch, if it addresses permits, etc. What they were asked is for how they price the cost to do an install, and this is the information that they provided. They were willing to provide.
And what is what variables enter the equation if it's a house that's not on public water?
Well, specifically, Commissioner, the concern there is there has to be a minimum reliable quantity of water to supply the system.
Oh, I see. Here you got it itemized. 1,500 pump and tank are required. Okay.
And in a nutshell, that involves, I hope I'm still current, 260 gallons of water. In most cases, there are exceptions, reductions. If it's a smaller dwelling, there's a 10-minute flow requirement. It's based on 26 gallons a minute, 2 heads flowing at that combined rate. 10 minutes, there's your 260 gallon, equivalent to a fuel oil tank, if you will, in homes heated with fuel oil. The pump that is typically required does not have to be listed. That is required to drive the water to provide the sprinkler heads with proper both quantity of water and a proper pressure so that they operate correctly and cover the area they're designed to protect. Back to the National Fire Protection Research Foundation finding. This was published in September of 2008. I think this number will probably ring familiar to you, $1.61 per square foot as a national average cost to install residential sprinklers. Similarly, the Prince George's County study reported an average cost to install residential sprinklers dropped continuously over the length of the study, and the only figure that was reported, it said that it stands at a current average of less than $2 per square foot. Again, Prince George's County, Maryland. The Scottsdale, Arizona study said an initial cost was $1.14 per square foot, and they're showing an average cost now of 59 cents per square foot. I think it's fairly safe to say that their experience is all public water provided systems for that low of a figure. Now I'd like to touch on some loss of life information. You're also probably familiar with the fact that on average, there's actually more than 3,000 fire deaths occur in the United States annually. More than 80% of all these fire deaths occur in residential occupancies. The irony is that 80% of that 80%, if you will, or 4 out of 5, occur in 1 and 2 family. And they're not the fires that are typically the big headlines. It's the hotel, motel with multiple deaths that make the headlines. But unfortunately, the vast majority of the deaths occur in the 1 and 2 family, which are the types of incidents that occur in jurisdictions like Carroll County. According to the National Fire Protection Association, the presence of a, quote, properly functioning smoke alarm only will reduce the risk of a fire death occurring in a home by 50%. Clearly, that's a significant number. However, the NFPA also states that the combined presence of properly functioning residential sprinklers and smoke alarms increases that reduced risk of fire death to 80%. According to the Maryland State Fire Marshal's Office, during a 6-year period, 2004 through 2009 inclusive, more than 30% of all the fire deaths in the state of Maryland occurred in a 1 and 2 family dwelling that was equipped with a smoke alarm. That fire marshal's findings also stated that there has never been a single fire death in the state of Maryland in a 1 or 2 family dwelling properly protected or protected by a properly functioning residential sprinkler system. Similar information from the Prince George's County study. Again, the numbers are before you, but to show that in the fires occurring in dwellings not protected by sprinklers, 101 fire deaths, 328 civilian injuries. In contrast, in the 245 fires that occurred in residential dwellings that were protected by sprinklers, 0 fire deaths, 6 civilian injuries were reported.
When you say civilian injuries, you mean fire personnel, fire safety personnel?
Non-fire personnel.
Non-fire personnel.
So the occupant or possibly a neighbor or someone near passerby trying to assist, etc., but non-fire service
Do we
related.
have any figures on the injury rates of our fire personnel in sprinklered versus non-sprinkled homes?
I don't have a percentage or reduction on the fire service injuries, Commissioner. I apologize for not having that available to you.
The PG County data is actually not very good. I mean, it was weak. It doesn't really strengthen your case. I mean, maybe a teeny bit, because if you look at the first example, there's 54 times more fires that occurred in single-family dwellings that were not protected. And when you divide those deaths by 54, the number of civilian injuries was the same in both cases, although there were 2 deaths without sprinklers where there were none with them. But I'd be very interested in knowing what the effect is on our firemen, our firewomen, in terms of what their risks are when they go into these houses, if we have any data on that.
I will gladly gather that and get it to the board ASAP. I just want to add, Commissioner, I actually made that same review when I looked at the numbers as far as the ratio percentage, and I do agree that is, as far as the comparison of the occurrence of the fires, etc. I think the other thing I will just simply state is this is just an objective summary, if you will, of the reports of these various studies, surveys, etc. Again, as reported by PG County, they're the numbers that their report contained.
The 101 deaths versus the 0 deaths, that's for what? That's for PG County also?
Yes, sir. And again, the Prince George's County study was a 15-year period, and the Arizona was a 10-year period. I'd also like to share that Carroll County was actually contacted, I'm going to say at least a year or so ago, because they were looking at jurisdictions having varying periods of time or experience with their sprinkler requirements or ordinances. That wasn't something relevant to this kind of overview with cost, etc. I'll just share that is the type of follow-up that folks like the National Fire Protection Association, et cetera, do on a regular basis 5, 10, 15-year studies to get an idea of the effectiveness or the outcome of having sprinklers in residential occupancies.
And on our, this provision has been in place for a little over 5 years for Carroll County, right? How does our statistics compare to, say, the 5 years before or the 5 years after? Do we have any idea? I mean, was it when it was passed, was it because we were experiencing residential fire deaths in Carroll County?
What I will share, Commissioner, and we're very fortunate to have several representatives here from the County Volunteer Fire Rescue Service.
Sure.
It was promoted as a very effective, probably the single most effective way to prevent the occurrence of a fire death, not just to the building occupants, also to protect the lives of the firefighters. It also has a substantial reduction in the impact of a fire, as in what happens once ignition occurs. And that actually is a very key point. Sprinklers do not eliminate the ignition, the initial incipient fire. What it stops is what happens after that ignition.
Sure.
And it's not allowed. So what was proffered by the fire service was, again, instead of going from let's have the resources once a fire occurs and becomes a substantial fire to, the next step is it possible to eliminate those working fires from occurring and concurrently protect the lives of the people in the dwellings as well as the firefighters who would respond should a working fire occur. And that, I believe, really was the basis, the core of that proposal by the fire service.
And also at that time, Scott, just as is the case now, the volunteer fire companies were having trouble attracting volunteers, and this particular ordinance was a mechanism by which they could retain volunteers, hopefully continue to attract volunteers by not making their jobs any harder than they already are. Isn't that right?
That is correct, Commissioner.
Explain, why would that be? Explain that.
If I may, it would help reduce future demand on the service.
Okay.
So I can't speak to retention, but what it would allow is existing resources to be extended, or the ability for the volunteers to maybe function longer than if there weren't a reduction in the future demand placed upon them. A sprinkler dwelling will not, and I'm saying this statistically, will not experience a working fire. That eliminates the demand for the fire service to respond, the commitment of resources, the expenses that we talked about earlier. That is the premise, if you will, that by having a sprinklered community, the more homes that are protected by sprinklers, each home that is protected is one less home that you can anticipate having a working fire in, i.e. a call to the fire service, like the one that happened in Pleasant Valley early this morning.
Okay, so if you have a fire and you're in a residential facility that has a sprinkler, presumably the fire company is responding in some measure, but because it does not become a working fire, we're not having to add additional resources to respond to that fire. Is that what you're suggesting? I mean, is that...
Exactly, Commissioner. And please keep in mind that what is dispatched is first and foremost determined by what the caller reports.
Okay.
If a person calls and says, "My house is on fire," and we're aware that, or "I had a house fire, the sprinkler didn't operate," the fire department's going to respond in a reduced fashion, both in their rate, because they're first and foremost concerned about the safety of themselves and the folks that they're responding near. But they're going to go, again, at a safer rate and also in a reduced presence or number.
Now, how is that determination made? Do we know what facilities, which dwellings have sprinklers, or is that something we're asking in the call?
That's correct, Commissioner. There's no way that we could track a given residence and somehow know that, that residence has sprinklers in it. It's, again, what the caller reports to us.
But do we actually ask that in a call, a 911
They
call?
are queried. They are asked as far as what's occurring, better example, if I can, or to elaborate. There was a time where if a caller called 911 and said, "My house is on fire,"
right,
that in itself, it literally stopped. We didn't do any pre-dispatch questioning and assisting the folks, and literally that provoked a substantial dispatch.
Okay.
Now we go the next step. We ask them what's on fire, what's going on, and that's after we confirm that it's safe for them to continue the conversation.
Sure, obviously.
If not, then they're instructed to go somewhere and call us back.
Understand. But are they asked if they have sprinklers?
They're asked I'm not going to sit here, Commissioner, and tell you that every dispatcher will ask a caller to say, is your home protected by sprinklers?
Okay.
But they will query the conditions, what's on fire, what's going on. And I can only hope that a caller would share that they've experienced something where a head
My
has...
sprinklers have gone off, or
Yes,
whatever,
you know,
okay.
I've got a head going off, I had a fire in my microwave or my dryer or something like that, to give them that picture. They are trained to query the caller. If they specifically say,
Okay.
is your home sprinklered, I'm not going to sit here and tell you they definitely do, Commissioner. I would not do that.
Sure. Oh, okay. All right.
Let's move on to property damage. Again, I apologize that I'm not trying to read this verbatim, have this information, but what the various studies show that, as an example, the National Fire Protection Association reports that, quote, residential sprinklers reduce the average property loss by 71% per home fire. That would make sense with the understanding that sprinklers are present, they don't allow fires to become large, raging, and destructive. Prince George's County actually put some dollar values in. Again, it's maybe not the actual figure being relative, but the comparison of $9,983 in the average loss without sprinklers, $4,883 if there were sprinklers present. The other figure that they included in the report was the average dollar loss per dwelling fire without sprinkler protection in which a fatality occurred. That number was $49,503. It does not elaborate as to why, or any feelings or follow-up as to why why that would be the case, but they did clearly report that where there's a fatality involved, and again, an unsprinklered, that number jumps to almost $50,000 on average. The Scottsdale, Arizona study, similar findings as far as the reduction, although the percent reduction is substantially greater. They reported $17,000 plus without sprinkler protection, average dollar loss with sprinklers, just under $2,000. Another very extensive survey or study was done by the National Institute of Standards and Technology. That was done in September 2007, and it was actually titled, quote, Benefit Cost Analysis of Residential Fire Sprinkler Systems. Just some highlights of that study. The analysis involved an examination of 4 years of data, 2002 through 2005. The analysis found that in 2005 dollars, you have the figures before you as far as the cost to sprinkler various size and styles homes. The analysis specifically states, and I quote, estimated benefits of residential sprinklers as, first bullet, 100% reduction in civilian fatalities, and I added the due to fire for clarity, 57% reduction in civilian injuries, again due to fire, and 32% reduction in both what they classified as direct property damage and indirect property costs, again as a result of the fire. Again, this is from the National Institute of Standards and Technology, September 2007 study. The analysis.
What's the problem? Any one house, if we build 100 houses in the lifetime of the house, let's say let's just use an arbitrary number, 30 years, what percentage of those 100 houses will have a fire? Is it 1%, 2%? Do we have any idea?
I don't, Commissioner, although I don't have statistics in front of me to bear it out. I will tell you that on average, I think the assumption or the feeling is that you'll probably, quote unquote, call the fire department once in your lifetime to respond for a fire, and substantially more than that for the need for EMS. Statistically, I can't support that and say, on average, in 100 homes in a 30-year period,
how many fires?
7.5%.
We have 60,000 houses in this county. How many residential fire calls do we make a year?
I'm actually going to turn, if I may, Commissioner, and ask, gentlemen, do you know as far as how many house fires on average the fire service responds to in a year?
I have totals, but they're doubled by if 3 companies go to a fire call. I counted 3 where just one fire call, so I don't know how that works.
Well, give us the gross number, and we'll just make an assumption. We'll divide it in half maybe to get a guesstimate.
We can come prepared with that information.
Okay.
Just one of the concerns I have, I mean, look, I'm concerned about the safety, and I'm very concerned about our fire department and the risks we expose them to, but I'm having trouble with these financial numbers because we're calling this cost benefit. But if I spend $300,000 putting sprinklers into 100 homes, and over the life of those 100 homes only one catches on fire, and it reduces the loss by $5,000, that's not a very good cost benefit. That's why I'm trying to understand this better.
What I'd like to offer, Commissioner, and I understand your point, is I would like to provide you either a link or, depending on how lengthy the report is, the full report, if you'd like. I'm glad to get that to you immediately.
Scott, do we have any ideas, since, now there was, when the ordinance went into place, obviously it didn't do anything with the existing dwellings, is that right?
That's correct.
People didn't have to go back and put them in.
Nothing retroactive without no.
Do you have any idea what percentage of our residential homes would have sprinklers in
Percentage,
them?
no, but I do have permit history to give you, to put it in perspective of how many homes have been permitted since it became effective. And that's,
1,100.
right, that's a couple pages back. It's 1,162, and that's year-to-date through May 31st of this year.
It's about 2%. About 2%.
That would have sprinklers.
Right. Again.
Well, I mean, yeah, there was a statewide law that applied to like multi-purpose dwelling units and all that sort of thing. So there are a lot more than 2% in Carroll County that are sprinklered.
As far as total residential occupancies, yes. As far as one and two family, that single-family ranch or that duplex, other than a voluntary installation, since January 1 of 2006, there have been 1,162 building permits issued by Mr. Green's Bureau for one and two family dwellings where the sprinklers would have been a requirement of construction to get their UNO. That's where that number comes from.
Would information that he has in his files indicate which homes may have voluntarily installed, may have put that in their plan when they originally sought a permit? Because some people who believe in this, I'm sure, installed sprinklers in houses they were building prior to this study. And that, you know,
Commissioner,
I
I'll
mean,
say,
before it was required.
yeah, but,
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, some say for insurance purposes as well, you know, to get the insurance.
well, I have another
benefit.
question about that when we get to it.
yeah, I would say that his records may, but with all due respect, I sure can't assume that he's documented or has
Well,
on that.
I mean, I don't know if it's the sort of thing that is readily available. Probably someplace in a drawing, it shows a sprinkler system. Whether it's a tidbit of data that is extractable, you know, it readily is quite another issue, and may not be.
And another issue is if it's not a code-driven feature, he may not even be aware of it.
Yeah.
I mean, they may have done it well-intended, but simply did it independent of any permitting, et cetera. I believe I'm down to, again, this is as reported by what I referenced, the 2007 study by the National Institute of Standards and Technology. That report shared, again, that a, quote, average 8% reduction in homeowner insurance premiums is experienced with residential sprinklers versus houses not protected. And again, this report has a quote that the analysis concluded that residential fire sprinklers are cost effective. And again, Commissioner Rothschild, I'll gladly get you that full report either in print or a link to it for your review.
Well, to the best of your knowledge, does that report show so things like the average cost of insurance for various facilities and what 8% means versus the cost? 8%, I don't know. At 8, you know, if the cost of insurance is $100 a year, 8% is not a big, you know, it's not much of a savings. If it's $10,000 or $50,000 a year, it may, you know, it's a bigger deal. I hear the number, and in terms of that, comparing that to a $2,000 or $3,000 or $4,000 installation fee.
Your average homeowner's policy is like, $700 or $800 a year, right?
That would vary
I mean,
the value of the home.
that's common sense.
Yeah.
$700 or $800 a year.
Well, it's common sense for those of you who know those things.
That's what it is, though, Dave.
And my CFO here.
We will allow you to stipulate that, counsel.
Commissioner, I will share that, trying to recall reviewing this particular study, I don't remember seeing dollar figures. It was presented in percentage. You made a valid point. I don't know if it's 8% of an average of $400 or $800. It wasn't specified in the report. I'll be more than
Sure.
happy to go back to it and see if I can glean that.
I just wondered if it, you know, is somewhere in there, because if you're going to talk about, was it worth it based on the insurance alone? Now, you know, it may still be worth it based on the safety factors. But if somebody was going to reach a conclusion that just based on the insurance savings alone over a reasonable lifetime of a facility, it was worth the investment, we have to compare the investment in the sprinkler system to the actual dollars that were saved, and I guess that's
It's a
the,
pretty long payback.
I have a question.
I just don't know.
I mean, maybe I'm getting cranky in my old age, but,
You are.
yeah, I know I am. I mean, I've been told that.
Can we
Why are we-
Can we get an opinion from your wife? on
Yeah,
that?
well, I'm
Yeah,
sure she'd
yeah.
vouch for that. But, why are we getting this presentation? Are we contemplating tinkering with this sprinkler ordinance, or what? Because,
We just had 45 minutes of open time.
Is that what it was?
Didn't know what to do with it.
okay.
Yes. we
Yes,
are.
it was a
We
request.
are?
Yeah, we
Yes.
requested the
A couple of the
information.
board members
Well,
requested.
I think that is an incredibly silly notion, but I appreciate your presentation, Scott.
And carry forward in light of that endorsement.
Scott, one other question. The damage figures here, when they talk about damage, average loss, I'm going to assume that's total loss, or not just attributing loss to fire versus fire and water damage?
I'm sorry, Commissioner.
Well, Prince George's County, for example, has average dollar losses with and without sprinklers. Is that total dollar losses, or that just losses attributed to fire? Does it include water damage?
Commissioner, again, as familiar as I can be from trying to recall reviewing this study, I don't remember it saying, trying to delineate physical fire damage versus maybe smoke damage, which is significant, and/or potential water damage. It was presented as a average dollar loss. My opinion, if that matters, is that would be an inclusive cost of the total loss incurred due to the fire, which is all aspects, supplying water, the smoke extension, heat damage, etc., sprinklered versus not sprinklered. That would be my take on that figure.
Do we have any figures on how many false triggers we get per 100 homes or 1,000 homes with sprinkler systems?
I'm showing my age now, Commissioner, but I know many, many years ago, sprinklers were touted as having a faulty rate of 1 in 16 million. It just sticks because it's such an amazing number that
we've
1 in 16 million
We've had
sprinkler
no
heads are
cases
considered
that you're
faulty.
aware of, at least, in the county where sprinklers have prematurely triggered that.
The sprinkler head itself, no, sir. I can't tell you that I am familiar of a single, and I've spent my adult life, or actually since I was a kid, in the fire service, and I don't recall a sprinkler head failing, other than being maybe damaged, physically damaged, and that's a commercial application. A tow motor strikes it. What I am familiar with, unfortunately, is where installation wasn't done properly.
I can tell you, Scott, that I lived in a townhouse in Hampstead when I first came to Carroll County, and we had one of our heads leak in our in our family room, and that was more attributable to a faulty developer than a faulty sprinkler.
Understood.
So
And
yeah,
that
it
is
did
the
happen.
They
occurrences
don't go off
are.
when you smoke cigars?
No, it didn't.
When sprinkler heads
Good to
go
know.
off, do they trigger a call to the fire department?
Not a requirement of the residential, the 13D. It is something that's both an option and recommended, but it is not a requirement. I think, Commissioner, what's necessary is to put the whole purpose of a residential sprinkler system is to protect the lives, if you will. It's not really meant to protect property. It is a very significant benefit of the presence of the sprinklers. But the goal is, if fire breaks out, the sprinklers activate, it keeps the fire either in check or extinguishes it, and literally maintains a tenable environment so that the occupants can get out safely. What's I will say an undeniable benefit is that as a result, it keeps the fire in check or extinguishes it, and it does not expose the fire service to, as I call it, a working fire environment.
Right.
But that really wasn't the intent. It's a for lack of a term, a windfall, if you will, of the residential sprinklers. It was meant to protect the lives of the occupants. What it's done is significantly protect the lives of the firefighters, reduce fire loss, reduce demand for resources.
Scott, do we have any Carroll County specific information at all about before and after this ordinance went into place? Residential deaths, property damage, number of calls, I mean, anything that suggests that, boy, this one particular area, we've seen a reduction since we put this in place?
Unfortunately, Commissioner, we are not a recipient or collector of that kind of data from the fire service. They very well may be able to provide it, or I know that the county is a participant in the statewide fire reporting system. We can glean it back, but as far as, for example, the Office of Public Safety, we are not a recipient of that kind of regular reporting. So candidly, no, sir, I do not have that data to share with you, before and after experience for rate of occurrence, et cetera.
And is that data that you guys would have, or at least be able to get at some point, or?
Just like Scott said, it would be available through our national fire reporting system that we're all part of.
Okay.
Which is, keeper of that is State Fire Marshal.
Okay.
We send the reports.
But it would be specific to Carroll County's information if we got that information. Okay.
Can I assume that the only concern of the fire department is safety of fire personnel and the occupants of the homes? You're not here for cost benefit and financial concerns, is that
I
true?
think that's a pretty big concern, though.
No, it's a big concern, no, it's a big, I just want to make sure, yes.
Like Scott said in the very beginning, and I was very instrumental in.
Can you step up to the microphone?
Either, yeah. we need to
Let
get
them
this.
step up there, so yeah.
Okay.
My name's Richard Green. I actually chaired the committee to bring residential sprinkler to Carroll County. I also past president of CC Visa. The main number one factor, and sitting here listening, I think a lot of you are missing the point. Well, you can't put a price on life safety, on saving a life. You're talking about 8% reduction in insurance, how long it takes to pay back, what the property damage comparison is. Like Scott said, the property damage, that's not even a consideration. It's life safety. He gave you some data on smoke detectors. Only 50% of the smoke detectors in the houses out here, and we know this for a fact because we've surveyed communities, only 50% of smoke detectors even operate, because every home might have one, actually, and that's not true. Probably only about 60 or 70% of the homes have one, and out of that 60 or 70%, only 50% have batteries in them. We've gone door to door and found that out, and that's a nationwide problem, and we're trying to address that. Like I said, you can't put a price on life safety. The facts are there. We've never, and I think you can go nationwide, never lost a life in a single-family dwelling with a sprinkler head. It's such good technology. The price is coming down all the time. And the biggest boost that CC Visa saw, we love being volunteers. We're at that breaking point right now. If we don't do something for the future, we won't be volunteers anymore. You're going to start putting out money for a career because the calls are going up, demand for service.
And that wouldn't be fiscally conservative, would it?
Exactly. We're trying to build in the community risk. We're trying to make the development pay for that. And the little bit of cost is only 1 to 1.5% of the cost of a dwelling to do that, instead of putting out millions of dollars, which we have an estimate of about $30, $40 million for a career fire service. And I'm telling you, right now, we're on the brink of that.
At least 20.
Right. We're on the brink of that. This was to keep volunteers longer. A perfect example, house fire this morning in Pleasant Valley. They send 4 or 5 engines with 4 or 5 guys, and then if they need help, they call second alarm. There's another, now you're up to 20 trucks and 40 or 50 guys. We got on a sprinkler head. The initial call might send that same 4 trucks and 4 or 5 men, but they get there, the fire's out, the first engineer cancels everything else, them guys go back to bed. And remember, these are volunteers. They can either go there and spend the next 5 or 6 hours there, and that's away from their jobs and their family, or they go there and 10 minutes later they turn around and go home because the fire's out. We are volunteer, and I can speak for all of them. The demand on the volunteers is becoming very demanding, and that's through training, the time spent on calls, the fundraising, because we're not being adequately even funded. So the demand of the volunteers, and that goes to retention. That's why we can't keep the young guys. A young guy today with a family has to work 2 jobs.
And I
can't afford to go out every day for 4 or 5 hours and not get paid.
And I think the volunteer aspect of it is a huge consideration. I guess we're trying to distinguish between the various different things going on here. Have we actually seen a savings and loss of life in Carroll County because of it, in your estimation? I mean, I understand the volunteer side of it and the use of equipment. I guess we're trying to understand. I agree with you. I mean, I think that is the most compelling argument, is the savings.
Well, here in Carroll County, we've been very fortunate because, and we do a lot of fire prevention activity as well, volunteers. We have a low rate of fire death. But I can tell you, at the same time we were working on this ordinance, an elderly couple lost their lives in Hampstead. Had this been in effect a year sooner, or when they had built their house, they'd be alive today. But while we were discussing all this stuff, we had people dying right here in Hampstead.
Yeah.
So to date, since this went in, there's been no fire deaths. And another very important thing is firefighter safety as well, because houses today are building much cheaper. The builders push for all the codes to change to lightweight construction. We used to be able to safely go 10 or 15 minutes before we had to worry about collapse. Now, we get there within 3 or 4, that house is coming down.
Yeah.
The first guys in the house are falling through the floors because of lightweight construction. So it's a big thing for firefighters safety, to the point that it's going to get to the point where we're going to pull up and watch it burn because we're not going to risk our firefighters.
Right.
With the sprinkler system in there, not only do we get the occupants out, but we're allowed to go in and maybe we have to mop up the wood or something. That's all we got. We go back to work, we go back to our family. So I can tell you, the CC Vista Fire Department is 100% keeping this in place. We fought very hard to get it. We're actually pushing very hard for statewide. And no matter what you do with a 1 and 2 family, the state's still going to do the townhouses and apartments anyway. Everybody talks about the cost. Your low-income people are in townhouses and apartments. They're going to be done. Your modular homes coming in from Pennsylvania, whatever, by state, they still have to be done. So no matter what we do on a county level, there's still going to be sprinklers coming in, just not where we need them most.
Well, I'd like to say, it wouldn't be fair to say that we don't get it, because we're asking these questions, because please don't take the questions to mean there's an attitude. We're repeating some things we hear, and we have to be prepared to answer other people. And we need to be armed with information and facts when our constituents talk to us about these issues, and so we ask a lot of questions that might indicate we're heading down one path or another, but it's not necessarily so. We're just looking for as much information as possible so that we can, whatever it is we do, we're fully armed to defend it.
I understand, and I apologize if I came off that way. It's just, but sitting back here, you're talking about a lot of things, but nobody's really saying the life safety part of it, and that's key to it. And I guess the second benefit is to keep the volunteers longer in the
Let me
county.
ask you also, and I don't know if Pennsylvania has. Does Pennsylvania have volunteer firefighters, or they are all paid volunteers? Both. Okay.
Both.
Pennsylvania, from what I understand, and I may not have this exactly right, went to an opt-out on the sprinklers where they were required, but if the builder and the homeowner both signed off on it, they could opt out of it. Are you familiar with that at all?
I'm not 100% familiar. I've heard, like you, I've heard different things.
Because I
wouldn't wanna
understand
quote
Cecil
something.
County just went to that as well.
Okay.
Cecil County, Maryland just went to that as well.
And I can't quote what they've done. I live and work, or I live and volunteer in Carroll County. I worry about what goes on in Carroll County.
No, I understand.
Well, you should.
And being from Cecil County, I wouldn't necessarily hold them up as a model for everything.
Nor would I, but it doesn't mean they couldn't have a good idea.
Well, they could, and they do like
We should leave ourselves open to that possibility.
Mr. President, there are some notes that Scott has.
Scott can
and
speak
the
to both,
Doctor talks about
At the
that.
very end.
He's going to
Yeah.
talk about that.
Any other questions for me?
And, Dickie, I mean, you'll recall that I was a big proponent of this ordinance when it was bandied about 5 years ago. In fact, up in Hampstead, we passed a resolution in support and piggybacked on the county ordinance and all that sort of thing.
Right.
So, I understand completely. Even the data, Scott, that we have shows that lives have been saved in PG County. I think you can draw that correlation from the numbers that we have. And I agree with you, Dick, I don't think you can put a price tag on that. But what concerns me the most...
Well, we do, though. We put a price tag on it. We don't
But
put a
you
fire-
shouldn't.
Okay, but we don't put a firefighter in every house.
But you shouldn't. You shouldn't put a price tag on that.
Well,
You know?
Putting sprinklers in is like...
Consider what he's
we
saying,
do have to
Commissioner, about the impact on their ability to attract and retain volunteers.
Putting a
They're
sprinkler
already
system in the
overtaxed.
house.
I'm not suggesting that the ordinance is, that there aren't 100 good reasons to look at this. All I'm saying is the notion that you would spend an unlimited amount of money because of, from a safety standpoint, I'm just saying practically, that's just not how.
But you're not talking about an unlimited amount of money.
Well-
I mean, you have the numbers in front of you.
Okay, but
And the fact of the matter is, this is what concerns me about this. We keep going down this path, it seems to me, of trying to streamline processes and make it easier for residential developers to build houses. That shouldn't be our focus, it seems to me. Our focus, I wasn't elected to represent the residential development community. I was elected to represent the people of Carroll County, particularly those in District 2. And the volunteer firefighters in my district are a big part of that. And I don't want to saddle them with $20 million in additional tax burden if we have to go to paid firefighters.
No, I don't
Now,
want
factor that into your cost-benefit analysis.
All right, well, it's not my cost-benefit analysis, and I'm not even suggesting that I would do that either. All I'm suggesting is that if an individual, not a developer, but a homeowner is building a home, I want to be able to explain to them why they have to do that, why they don't have the choice
I
to
think
do it or not
it's
do
a
it.
very easy explanation.
Okay, well, then we'll give them your phone number.
You do
The
that.
amount of money here is not insignificant. We've
I mean,
we've already spent $3 million on sprinkler installations, and maybe that's a great return on investment, maybe it's not, I don't know yet, that's what we're trying to figure out here.
I mean, none of my
it's not just
constituents
about
are beating me up about the residential sprinkler ordinance. I've never heard a complaint about it.
It's not only about the cost analysis, though. There is a philosophical part to this, too, which is, should the government be saving my life? And I would prefer that I make that decision of whether I put in a sprinkler system or not, based on a cost analysis, the risk. You know, it's dangerous for me to drive down the road, too, but I don't want the government to tell me I can't drive a car because I might be in an accident and die.
They're going to request they
And
remove
there are other things that are life-threatening.
Are you going to
but-
request the removal of seatbelts and airbags when you got your children in the car?
I didn't wear a seatbelt, and I survived. So there is a risk factor.
And if you have a fire, are you going to dial 911? Because if you do, you just invited the government into your house.
That's
The
exactly
minute
right.
you dial 911, you ask the government, come help me, and the government's job is to do it the most efficient and best way they can, and we, as that part of that government, come into your house or asking for your help so we don't have the big fires, we don't risk our lives, we can go back home to our families or our jobs quicker.
You're
That's
exactly
what we're
right.
asking. And the minute you dial 911, you invited the government into your house. Simple as that.
That's a good point. And the aspect of how it affects the fire side is an aspect that we need to consider. But as far as whether the government should be making rules about protecting me from my dumb self, I'd rather they mind their own business.
Well, and I think Commissioner Roush's point is, ought to be not lost on anybody, not just on this topic, but on any topic. The idea of asking the question to try to understand both sides of the argument should not suggest any intent to decide one way or the other. We're just trying to understand both sides of the equation. So I agree.
Commissioners, for the sake of your agenda, I know we're well beyond the estimated time. Just very quickly, the remainder of this information, you will see things like comparison of residential sprinklers versus the typical firefighting hose lines, to give you an idea of the comparison of what's involved in a sprinkler head going off versus a fire suppression hand line or two being used. Just a figure to throw out, we talked about a fixed temperature, the typical residential sprinkler head, 155 degree Fahrenheit operating temperature. There are clear benefits to improving on lightweight construction when it comes to fire behavior. I just want to point out that sprinklers address fires and the combustible material that burns regardless of the type of construction. In a better way to put it, you can build a house out of concrete and stainless. It's how you furnish it that determines what may burn inside that structure. So yes, there is clear benefits to enhancing, improving, beefing up lightweight construction. It is not the same, if you will, as the presence of sprinklers. Just for some clarity, that it addresses part of, but not all the issues when it comes to the sprinklers.
Sure.
You'll also see where, again, we already talked about the permitting activity that's in the handout. Specifically, Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, April 25 of 11, the governor, Tom Corbett, signed into law repealing the required installation of automatic sprinkler systems in new single-family residential construction. The repeal of the residential sprinkler requirement included provision requiring builders to, quote, offer sprinkler systems to buyers, as well as, quote, retroactivity for homes with building permits that would require sprinklers. I take that to mean they were relieved of that requirement once this bill was signed. Cecil County, this actually came from Director Brooks, Cecil County Department of Emergency Services. He said the Board of Commissioners recently repealed the requirement for installation of sprinklers in newly constructed 1- and 2-family dwellings. He stated that the repeal, quote, did not include any other requirements or alternative measures for single-family dwelling. It was just a, quote, repeal. The proposed amending ordinance included an option to buyer, et cetera, the same thing that you alluded to. And the last thing I included in this, the information that's titled Residential Sprinkler Ordinance of Maryland, that's simply a cut and paste, if you will, from the website of the Maryland State Fire Marshal's Office. It is up to date as of 5/10/11, and it has both a map showing the jurisdictions as well as a table of what the status of sprinkler requirements are in the jurisdictions throughout the state. And the last thing I will share, and I'll gladly provide this to the board, just this morning, I was able to obtain, thanks to the efforts of Larry Eisminger, the Chief Fire Protection Engineer, again for the State Fire Marshal's Office, a updated survey of sprinkler costs, statewide survey that he conducted. I will get that information to you. I will share an average cost, $1.42. And again, there's 9 unidentified vendors that are licensed sprinkler contractors in the state of Maryland that were surveyed to get this information.
Scott, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions that you may or may not have the answer to, and I'm not sure if any of the folks from CC Visa would, but certainly you can retrofit a house to have sprinklers if it's already an existing dwelling, is that right?
You could, yes, sir.
Okay. Do you have any idea how the cost compares to doing it in a new dwelling?
Very expensive.
Much more expensive, Commissioner. Could I tell you it's twice the cost, 50% more? No, sir, I can't. But clearly, just understanding what the installation entails, clearly, I'll just say significantly more expensive if it's retroactive, if you do it after it's constructed.
Triple at least.
Significantly more.
At least double.
Yes.
At least
Because you literally have to do some destructive effort, which has to be repaired, if you will, versus putting it in when it's new and there is no destruction of existing conditions.
All that drywall work and all that.
Sure.
Yeah, it'd be very expensive.
Okay. Okay. Other questions?
I think I've said everything I wanted to say on this.
Pretty good speeches there.
It's good.
Yeah.
Well, no, I mean, this is not something to be taken lightly, so, I mean, we should have a extraordinarily extensive discussion on it if we're going to even
Just so you
look
know
at it.
some of the quirky things we have to deal with on our side, so you understand what kind of things drive us to have hearings like this. I got a phone call, I've got several phone calls on this, and one they were all from individual citizens that were building homes for themselves. They were not builders or developers, individual citizens building their own homes, and one of them says to me, well, you can make me put it in, but you can't make me activate it. If I do put it in, I'm not going to activate it. I'm going to keep the water shut off. I mean, you know, we can argue whether that's crazy or not, but we have to deal with reality. That's
And it is worth
feedback
saying,
from one citizen.
I haven't had any developer approach me about the sprinkler.
Neither have I.
requirements.
No developers. It's all been individuals that
Very
were
good.
building homes for themselves that were complaining. They were complaining to me that the cost for them to put these in their single-family homes was running I think the numbers I heard were $8,000 to $12,000. And like I said, at least one claim. And if he is forced to put it in, he's going to leave it shut off anyway. So, you know, we have to consider these things.
I think they're talking to the wrong folk.
Well, no, I'm
we
just
talk
telling
to
you,
everybody.
I'm just sharing with you what happens to us in our interactions with constituents. So, you know, we have hearings like this, and we get the CC Visa side of the story. We get your side of the story, Scott, and we balance all of the concerns and all of the numbers and all the evidence and all the human factors, and we try to make a prudent decision.
And sometimes, like Commissioner Roush said, I mean, it just gives us the ability to answer these questions when they're raised. You know, I mean, that's also very helpful. If someone calls and says, well, why do I need to do X? And we can say, well, there are some reasons. Well, then that's a different kind of a phone call than saying, you know what, we never even looked at it. I have no idea. We do it because it's always been done, or we do it because 6 years ago someone decided that it should be done.
Another interesting thing in your favor, an argument in your favor, which I will articulate for you. If, in fact, this results in an 8% reduction in homeowners insurance, that would be about, let's just say it's about $80 a year. That would be maybe let's just say it's $6 or $7 a month. Well, there's $1,500 in extra mortgage carrying capacity right there with interest rates what they are.
Which may pay for itself.
Which might almost pay for itself anyway over the life of the house. There's another consideration. So we're looking at all sides of this.
Commissioners, honestly, this was presented for an informational only, just as a briefing, brought here to try to give you some documented, some statistics, et cetera. I look forward to being able to bring more back to you. I've taken some notes. I'm going to get you some additional information for your review and consideration, and would welcome the opportunity to come back if there's any other information I can provide for you or the fire service, et cetera.
And it's good for the public to know also, we have no pending action on this. I mean, this is not something there's nothing pending at this time. So.
I hope it remains that way.